Go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy to get 20% off your first month of cognitive behavioural therapy, with weekly sessions online with a therapist, in addition to worksheets, a journal, meditation and yoga videos, and unlimited messaging. There's strong evidence that CBT can help people who hoard, and accessing therapy online can be affordable and accessible. Find out more and get your discount at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/online therapy.
Here's a cool fact. A crocodile can't stick out its tongue. Another cool fact, you can get short-term health insurance for a month or just under a year in some states. United Healthcare short-term insurance plans are designed for people who are between jobs, coming off their parents' plan, or turning a side hustle into a full-time gig. Underwritten by Golden Rule Insurance Company, they offer flexible, budget-friendly coverage with access to a nationwide network of doctors and hospitals. Get more cool facts about United Healthcare short-term plans at uh1.com.
I'm Sandra, and I'm just the professional your small business was looking for. But you didn't hire me because you didn't use LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn has professionals you can't find anywhere else, including those who aren't actively looking for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role, like me.
In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you'll miss out on great candidates like Sandra. Start hiring professionals like a professional. Post your free job on linkedin.com/spoken today.
Think of all the sleep hacks you've ever heard. You could spend years trying them all, or you could instantly transform your sleep with Boll and Branch. They make the softest, most breathable bedding you'll ever feel. And it's all 20% off. That's their best sale of the entire season. Millions of sleepers love their buttery soft sheets, airy blankets, cloud-like duvets, and so much more. And you can try all of them for 20% off with promo code BUTTERY20. So hurry to bollandbranch.com today. That's BOLL and branch.com. See site for details.
Welcome to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder podcast. I am drowning in stuff and trying to find a way out. Listen as I explore the issues and delve deep as somebody profoundly affected by hoarding disorder. Find out more, including links to subscribe to the podcast and all my social media at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. So I'm going to start today with a Happy New Year. Happy New Year. I hope it brings many wonderful things. I'm also going to start with my occasional series where I share my success of the week and my weird dilemma of the week. The success of the week is good to keep me and you motivated, because we can have successes that might look small to other people, but that we know are a big deal. And the weird dilemma is just because this disorder has a lot of weird thinking around it, doesn't it? So it's just an outlet for me to get some of that weird stuff out. A lot of you say that they are really, really relatable, the weird dilemmas. So I'm I don't want to say I'm glad about that, because I feel for you if you too have this kind of thinking, but it is also good to know it's not just me. So my success of the week is that I didn't buy another flask. I have a flask that I love dearly because, especially when it's cold like it is now, I'm able to fill it with boiling water and have cups of tea through the day without having to reboil the kettle all the time, or I can take it with me if I'm going somewhere. And especially when it's cold and you want to keep warm, a good supply of hot tea is just what you need. And so I have this flask and I get a lot of use out of it, especially when it's cold, and it makes me quite happy. And then I was in the supermarket and I was looking at various things and they had flasks, and my instinct was, oh, I've got to get another flask. I love my flask. 2 flasks would be even better than 1. I picked it up and I was pretty close to buying it. And then I stopped because I realised that what was happening in my brain was exactly that. I was thinking, if 1 flask makes me happy, then getting another flask will make me even more happy because flask equals happiness. And I thought, hold on, this is something I've identified in myself before in terms of acquiring. I think that if something made me happy, then getting more and more and more of that thing will make me happier and happier and happier and happier. But of course it doesn't work like that, because I don't need 2 flasks because I've got a flask and there's only so many flasks a person can use. My flask that I have is 1 litre and that's quite a lot of tea. It's not like I'm going camping and will need it to last even longer. 1 litre flask is perfectly sufficient. And so what would I really get out of a second flask? I would get that dopamine hit when I picked it up and put it into my trolley. I would feel briefly excited and then I would get it home and go, oh, where do I put the second flask? Because I use my flask a lot, but where would a second one live? What would I do with it? Why would I need it? And I would immediately know that I'd made a mistake. And so my success of the week is that I had that whole inner dialogue standing in the aisle of the supermarket, and I put the flask back on the shelf and carried on my food shop without buying it. My weird dilemma of the week. I am stretching the definition of week here because it was a couple of weeks ago. But I was organising my writing paper and greeting cards, birthday cards, congrats cards, all that kind of thing. And I have a bit of a system, but it's quite flawed. And so it was getting a bit chaotic. So I have these expanding files that those things live in. And so I was going through making sure the right things were in the right places. And first of all, I discovered that I own such a ridiculous number of envelopes to the moon and back. Because when you put with when you put all your envelopes in the same place, you go, oh my God, I must never buy envelopes again. So that was a kind of random side effect of doing this. But I was going through my writing paper and I like to write letters to my friends on pretty writing paper. So I have a bit of a selection of those, not a ridiculous amount, probably more than I need, but not to a degree that it's causing problems. So that's okay. So I was organising that. And I had also several pads of plain white writing paper. And this is where the dilemma comes in, because I don't really use plain white writing paper anymore. In the old days, that would be what I would use if I needed to write an official letter to a company or something. But now I type those and print them out on A4 paper. This wasn't paper I could repurpose for my printer if it's the wrong size. And it wasn't pads of paper I could donate because I had used at least some of the paper from each of the pads. And I didn't know what to do with them. I knew that realistically I wouldn't use them to write letters to my friends because I enjoy picking out pretty paper to write those letters. So I wouldn't use the plain white paper for that. I thought it was probably useful to keep some plain white paper pads. That feels like a tongue twister because, if my printer breaks and I need to write an official letter, it would be handy to have. I also knew I wouldn't use letter writing pads for other purposes. I wouldn't use them for to-do lists or anything like that because I have I have systems for that. I have a website I use for my work to-do lists and my podcast to-do list, which is extensive. And then I have nice notebooks I use for other things. And again, I appreciate the fact that those notebooks are nice, and so I wouldn't choose to use a bog standard plain white writing paper notepad for anything like that. So there was my dilemma. I had pads of plain white paper that I knew I wasn't going to use, that I couldn't donate because they were partially used, that I couldn't give to friends because they would think the same as me. When on earth would I use a pad of plain white paper? And so I didn't know what to do with them. And then I thought, there is just no need to keep these. There's no need to keep these. I can keep one pad of plain white paper in case the printer breaks and I need to write something official by hand. But I don't need 3 or more. I think there were 3, but they were quite substantial. And so I had that as a dilemma and I threw them out. And it was a biggie. It felt like a biggie because they were perfectly usable. I just wasn't going to use them. So the dilemma, I guess, was in that bit of the disorder where you feel very responsible for things and you have horror at the idea of being wasteful. And on the one hand, yeah, it was wasteful. It was wasteful. But the waste wasn't in throwing them away. The waste was in buying more than I needed and keeping them in my house unused versus putting them in the recycling. The waste has already happened, whichever of those options I chose. The waste happened when 10 years ago I bought my 3rd pad of writing paper that I didn't need. And so while it was difficult to decide to recycle it, and it was quite a hard decision for me, I feel okay about the course of action I decided on. Yay! I don't feel great about it, but I don't have to feel great about every decision. The fact is the waste already happened, and keeping it in my house for no reason other than avoiding throwing it away wouldn't make it any less wasteful. So that is my success of the week and my weird dilemma of the fortnight, maybe. So as it is the start of 2023, I want to talk today about New Year's resolutions and about setting a word of the year or an intention for the year and how to do it a bit differently, how to subvert it a bit to make it work for you. But first of all, I want to give you the chance to tell me topics you think I should cover in the podcast. I try and cover a wide range of perspectives and issues that hoarding can affect, but there are bound to be things I haven't thought of or that I have covered that you'd like to hear more about. So if you want to suggest a topic for the podcast, you can now do so. I've set up a form. It's literally just one question. What topic or topics do you think I should cover? And you can fill that form out at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/topic. That's overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/topic. Tell me your ideas and I will see what I can do. So, New Year's resolutions. I have many, many years of experience of setting a resolution and throwing myself into it and going all out, then burning out and abandoning it by mid-February. I've done that many times in many areas of my life. I've done it with exercise. I've done it with mindset. I've done it with things at work. I've done it with all kinds of things. And it's definitely not just me who does that. Gyms know that they get an influx of new members in January, and everybody's dwindled out by March. It is a well-known phenomenon, and a few years ago I realised that these things clearly didn't work for me. They just didn't. And I became okay with that because I realised it wasn't like me, that hoarder, fails at this. I mean, it partly was, but when you look at it in context, that nearly everybody fails at this, you have to start thinking, okay, maybe it's not that I'm a useless, terrible person. Maybe it's just that this isn't the best way to go about changing our lives and improving things. Maybe there's something about throwing yourself all in on something and then it fizzling out and you never do it again, that just doesn't match the way human brains work. So for a few years, I just didn't set resolutions. I knew they didn't work, so I stopped doing them. It seemed quite logical to me. I think if you have time off over like Christmas and New Year, you can feel a bit when you start back at work and when the world opens up again after New Year, you can feel quite refreshed. And I think that's quite encouraging for resolutions. But then within a week or two, you're just as exhausted and fed up and cold as you were in December, and it's all worn off. And I have a better understanding now of why that kind of big, bold resolution is not likely to succeed in the long run. Jan Eppingstall and I did a few episodes on habits, on creating habits and maintaining habits. And essentially, a lot of New Year's resolutions are about habits. And the research that Jan did and the conversations we had in those episodes really shifted my thinking on this kind of thing. That big and bold can be quite performative, but it's not necessarily that useful. It might look good briefly, but you don't often get the long-term change you're looking for. And instead, it's more about changes that you can attach to things you already do, and changes that are kind of incremental rather than something dramatic, rather than something massive, going instead for just extending what you're already doing a bit further. And then when that's your habit, extending it a bit further still, and how those kinds of changes are the ones that are more likely to stick than the big dramatic thing. So I didn't want to set a resolution. I haven't for several years. I wasn't planning on doing this year. But then I started thinking I would kind of like the opportunity to apply some of what I've been learning and some of what I've been benefiting from in a more deliberate way. So rather than set big, bold resolutions, what I have decided to do is to make more of a concerted effort to nudge the good practices I'm already doing a little bit further. If I'm doing something that's helpful, can I go one step further? If I'm taking 3 bags a day to the bin, can I take 4? If I am washing up my mugs after every cup of tea, can I also wash up some plates while I'm there? If I'm already cleaning the bathroom floor, can I clean the sink as well? Gentle, just pushing a little bit extra. Like I had a rule for a while that every time I went in the bathroom, I had to pick up, I think I started off with 3 things that weren't where they were supposed to be, and either put them where they were supposed to be or put them in the bin. every time I went in the bathroom. And obviously you have to go in the bathroom several times a day. And then after I'd done that for a while and it became quite habitual, I was able to nudge that up to picking 4 things up every time I went in the bathroom and seeing what I could do with them. And then once that became habitual, I was able to nudge it to 5 things. It's that kind of thing rather than declaring that I was going to sort out the entire bathroom today and never put a hair out of place in there again. And then tomorrow I will sort out the entire bedroom and never put a hair out of place in there again. And it sounds great, doesn't it? It sounds like exactly what we want. But that's not behaviour we can keep up. That's not behaviour we can sustain. And I also, as well as kind of nudging things a bit further, I also wanted to apply some of what I've been learning about how rigid I get when I make a plan. So I've identified that if I'm going to do something, I feel I have to mentally plan it out first. And so I mentally plan it out and then I go to apply what I've planned out. And if the application doesn't go exactly as I thought it would, I have to stop and redo the mental plan from the start. And I talked about this actually in my review of the year episode and how I've been getting better at learning rather than scrap a plan entirely and start again because one aspect of it wasn't working, to instead kind of adapt a bit and change a bit. And so I start my plan, and if something's not quite working, I say, how can I stick to the plan but improve that bit of it? And that can be because the plan wasn't quite right, or it can be that, say I've been de-hoarding in a particular room. As I make progress, the situation in the room changes, and maybe the room needs a different approach after a while. So that kind of thing really doesn't come naturally to me because of all of those perfectionist tendencies that I battle with constantly. But I've identified that I do it, and I have been making a concerted effort to ease up on myself a bit and to learn to adapt a bit more rather than have it all perfect from the start. And so the thought of setting a New Year's resolution in stone also feels to me like it would go against that. If my New Year's resolution is to fill 10 bags a day, and for whatever reason that's not working, because of the nature of New Year's resolutions, you go, well, I can't fill 10 bags a day, therefore I'm throwing the entire plan out. And that's part of why they don't work, because if you adapt a bit, you feel like you're failing at the resolution. And if you're failing at the resolution, you may as well not do it at all rather than drop down to 8 bags a day. Whereas if you approach it more flexibly, then you can say, I'm going to try and fill 10 bags a day. And then if after a couple of weeks, it's really not working, because you haven't set it in stone as an official New Year's resolution, you can say, I'm going to try 8 and see how that goes. And then after a couple of weeks, okay, 8 seems to be working. Or, I think I could do a bit more now. Now I've got my de-hoarding muscle has been exercised a bit. I feel I can jump back up to 10. Or you might say, I'm exhausted, I'm ill, I'm going to drop down to 5. And that kind of change is the way we keep going with something rather than quit. Whereas if the rule is 10 bags a day and 10 bags a day doesn't work, then it's really easy to abandon all efforts altogether. So I realized I need to, in my New Year plan, I need there to be space within that to realign as I go. It needs to be nothing set in stone. It needs to be more of a vibe. It needs to be more of an attitude or an instinct or a guide, not a rule book. So then I started looking at and thinking about the idea of a word of the year. This has become quite popular in the last few years. People set a word or a phrase that is going to kind of guide them through the year. It's kind of like setting an intention. And this is less prescriptive than a New Year's resolution, but still can be quite rigid. We just don't know in January what guiding principle we're going to need in August. But we can use this idea, I think, a bit more flexibly. Now, I've done the word of the year before with words. I know one year I did focus, another year I did confidence, that kind of thing. And it was kind of starting the year saying, this is what I want to focus on. This is what I want my year to look like. This is how I want things to be. This is what I want to improve in my life. The idea is to create positive change in a more malleable way than a fixed New Year's resolution. It's a kind of guiding instinct rather than a specific goal. So rather than saying, I will do X every day, instead you will say, what can I do today that fits with the principle of my word of the year? What can I do today that fits with my goal of focus, for instance? And it's about creating positive change in your life, but it can verge into the realm of kind of toxic positivity. If you want to set your goal as kindness, great. But if you want to set your goal as success or happiness, that can be quite difficult to live up to for 365 days. And I've also realized that sometimes positive change comes in ways you don't expect. And sometimes for certain types of people, creating positive change comes by expecting less of yourself rather than more. Sometimes if you are a perfectionist and if it's very, very difficult for you to cope with not doing everything perfectly, that is a real impediment. It really gets in your way. It trips you up because if I can't do it perfectly, I may as well not bother. Or I don't think I'm going to be able to do this perfectly, so I don't dare try. And it really, really gets in your way. And so I was thinking of how I could encompass that in a kind of word of the year or phrase of the year. And I was also thinking that if I chose one, it would have to be like with the idea of nudging your behavior a bit as a resolution. It would have to be still subject to change. It would have to be open in a way that if you realize it's not working for you, you don't cling on to it just because on January the 1st you said you'd do it. And instead you can adapt it. And I think people get really scared of adapting New Year's resolutions or adapting words of the year because it looks like they are failing. They committed to doing something for an entire year, and by April they're either not doing it or they're doing it and they hate it, or it's wearing them out. And it's really rigid thinking, and it's really not helpful. It's where we have to think about the grey. It's not all black and white. It's not all you're either improving your life 0 or 100%. We can do 60%, we can do 20%, we can do 80%, and we can do a whole mixture of all of those throughout the year. We may have super productive weeks. We may have whole months where we just flop. And if we're calling ourselves a failure because of just those natural energy cycles and motivation cycles, then we're giving ourselves a really hard time. And there is a difference between giving up on a plan because you can't be bothered and adapting a plan because it wasn't quite working. But if we get to a point where we realize our plan isn't quite working, we can feel like adapting it is the same as giving up because we can't be bothered. And it's not. It's about improving it. It's about making us more likely to succeed. But we're so caught up in, I made the resolution, so it's what I should be doing, that we're not able to give ourselves that wiggle room to change things as we go. Like, I am learning all the time. I am learning through de-hoarding. It's a very learning experience, not always in a good way, but I'm learning constantly, like, what works for me or what doesn't work for me, or I come across a new technique that I hadn't thought of and it works for me, or it doesn't, or it works a bit, or it works a bit until I adapt it and then it works more. And it feels almost remiss to set a plan up in January with no accounting for the fact that by March I'll have learnt new things. I will have gained new insights. I will have gained new knowledge. I will have gained new wisdom. And so setting something in stone in January just doesn't account for the fact that we learn and we grow and we change. So part of it is about thinking about maybe our priorities or maybe the direction we want to be moving in rather than having really, really strict goals. And so I've come up with what feels like quite a subversive phrase for 2023. And having said all I've said, it feels like a good place to launch my year. And it feels challenging. I guess we need to challenge ourselves. We need to give ourselves something of a challenge in order to keep moving forward. And this feels challenging in a deep way, but also it feels really important based on what I've learned about myself through things I've talked about on the podcast, through my experience of de-hoarding, through my experience of life. And so the reason it's quite subversive is that my phrase of the year is aimed at combating my own perfectionism. And so my phrase of the year, I feel wary to even say it. I'm not going to lie. It sounds so wrong. But anyway, my phrase of 2023 is, it'll do, right? It'll do. So that when I don't think I've done well enough, it'll do. Or when I've made an effort and I've not made as much progress as I hoped, it'll do. Or when I can't work out the perfect formation for how to organize my books, it'll do. I need to break the need for everything to be just right if I'm going to make any significant progress. One of the things I identified in my review of 2022 was that although I made definite progress throughout last year, it made less of an impact on my home than I would have hoped. And a good part of that is regularly getting stuck because I don't know how to do something perfectly. So I'm going to start this year. I'm not committing to this till December. If it sticks till December and helps me till December, brilliant. But I need to be open for it not to be as useful as I think it might be. Maybe I think it will change my thinking and it just doesn't have any impact. Or maybe I get the hang of it quite quickly and can switch to something else. Who knows? It may change. And indeed, I'm trying to learn that things can change and adapt. And so I'm trying to embody that learning in my phrase of the year. It's out of character for me. I like structure and I like to know where I am with things and I like to have a plan, and it's unsettling to be saying this is my goal, but it may change. And it's unsettling to be committing publicly to you to a goal of the principle of it'll do rather than perfection. And if I have anything close to a resolution, basically I've had an idea. I don't want to come up with like 20 ways I can nudge what I'm doing to extend it a bit, because again, that just becomes unwieldy and stressful and overwhelming. So I've decided I'm going to start with one nudge, one habit I've already been able to establish that I can try and extend a bit. And the habit that I've already managed to establish is a rule I set myself that if I do online shopping, then when it arrives, I have to deal with the packaging there and then. I can't have a build-up of cardboard boxes like I had this time last year. Can't deal with that. So for the last few months, any time a package arrives, I get the stuff out of the packaging and then I tear up the cardboard box and put it in a bag ready to go out. But I've also realized that one of the things that's holding me back is that I'm much better at putting things in bags to go out than I am at taking those bags out. So I've got a lot better at deciding what I can throw away and putting it in a bag ready to go, but I haven't so much got better at then getting those bags out to the bin, out to the recycling, out to the charity shop. I'm doing some of that, but I'm filling more bags than are leaving the house. So the nudge I am going to make is that when online shopping arrives, and I do, as I have been doing, I get the packaging into rubbish bags. My extension of that habit that I've already got will be that those bags, as part of the same process, have to leave the house. They have to go into the bin or into the recycling. So I've got one habit and I'm going to extend it. Now, I'm already tempted to say every bag I fill has to go straight out without exception. And that is the kind of, it's a good idea, but in practice, what I know already I would do is I would think, oh, I'm not going to fill that bag because then I have to take it out and I'm not dressed in outdoor clothes, or I'm not going to do any tidying up because it's raining and I can't be bothered taking the rubbish out. And so I need to start small. I need to start with the behavior I've already got, that packaging goes straight into rubbish bags, and extend one bit of it, which is that packaging goes straight out to the bin. Ideally, it may have a knock-on effect on other bags I fill, but that's not the goal. That's not the resolution. Because as I've been banging on about this whole episode, this doesn't mean that I am committed for the rest of the year to do this and this alone and this perfectly. What I am committing to is trying this out. I'm committing to experimenting with this as a concept, as an idea. It's hard. I feel like I should be apologizing to you for not having a proper, strong resolution, despite everything I've just said, and I firmly believe everything I've just said, but the perfectionist in me wants to impress you with lofty goals. And I know that doesn't work for me or for most people. And I know that. It's just, it's difficult to admit that I can't always do impressive things. And maybe the year will go better if I start it out saying it'll do when something's not perfect and taking out one specific type of rubbish as soon as the bag is filled. It's somewhere to start, and I'm going to reassess periodically, and I'm going to reassess as I go, and if necessary or if appropriate, I'm going to realign and balance things out and just see how it works.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
With LinkedIn Jobs, we tap into a network of more than 1 billion professionals to help you find quality professionals quickly and easily for any role you need. Marketing wizards? Found them.
Software engineers?
Found.
That project manager I could never seem to hire?
And found. LinkedIn Jobs quickly matches your roles with candidates with the right skills and experience. In fact, 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. Post your first job for free and get started at linkedin.com/spoken. That's linkedin.com/spoken. Terms and conditions apply.
So as you may know, my hoarding is a big secret in my life. I find it very difficult to talk about. I know that sounds weird because it's all I talk about on this podcast, but this is like my outlet. Outside of this, I talk about it very, very little. And so I have a lot of secrets around it, and I get a bit fascinated by other hoarders' secrets. Because even if we're open about hoarding, there might be certain things we keep secret, and those secrets can fester away and feel really toxic and shame-filled and damaging. And so I occasionally ask listeners, if you want to, you can send me your secret for me to read out on the show. Now, I've set up a form so people can do this anonymously. I do not know who sends things in. I've got no way of accessing that information. All I get is a line on a spreadsheet that says the time and the date somebody sent it in and then their comment. And people have sent me their hoarding secrets, and I'm so touched and moved that you're trusting me with this. And I'm so impressed with everyone who's done it, because it's brave, because you know when you submit it that I'm going to read it out. And so, first of all, just a massive thank you to everyone who's sent a secret in. If you want to send me your secret anonymously, you can do so at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/secret. And I'm going to read out a secret that I got recently. So it says, I find swing tags of clothing hard to throw out, among other things, lol. Especially if they're made well. For example, thick black card with gloss black ink, a nice string and a nice little matching safety pin. One thought that goes through my head is that it's too nice an item to simply discard. The other is that it would potentially enhance the resale value of the item of clothing if I were to not wear it much and sell it later. It's like an original keepsake or memento that goes with the garment. It also contains info like the style, name, colour and size that I might not be able to find out later if I throw it away. It's like I want to hoard that info and the specific details as well. I hoard images on my phone in a similar way, pics of things and information about things that I can't delete for fear of never being able to find or clarify those details in the future if I needed to. First of all, thank you for sending that in. I really appreciate it. And I can relate to this, you know. I've kept labels, especially if they were nice, and for similar reasons. It's an interesting one, isn't it? I am better than I used to be on this, with a few exceptions. I don't do much reselling of my stuff. It's so time consuming, and for most things, it's not, for me, really worth the effort. But I do know that if I donate, say, some clothes to a charity shop, they can usually charge £1 or £2 more for something if it's got its original tags on compared to if it's not. And so I have sometimes... The other day, I found some trousers that I bought I don't know when, so I decided to try them on, and as per my current clothing rules, if they didn't fit, charity shop them. And so I went to try them on, and they still had their tag on from whenever it was I bought them, and without thinking I pulled the tag off, and I immediately felt hugely guilty, because if they didn't fit and I was going to donate them to the charity shop, that was money lost for the charity. They did fit, all is well. I can wear them. It's all good. But also the thing about, particularly well-made ones that feel like they're quite good quality. They can be nice to look at. They can remind you that you have some nice things. And you might want to know the precise name of the style of that garment later. But the main argument I use for myself when I'm tempted to do that is one that may be helpful to you or it may not. But the main argument I use for myself is that it may be that in 2 years' time the tag would come in handy. That's possible. But it is almost certain that when I need it, I will not know where it is. I don't have a place to store them. And if I did have a place to store them and I put all my tags in the same place, then if I needed some information from it in 2 years' time, I would have a drawer full of tags and I wouldn't be fully confident or at all confident that I could match the tag to the item of clothing. I don't know if I would be able to pair them up again. And the other thing is, realistically, how often do you need the information from that tag? Realistically, it occasionally happens that it would come in handy, but it's rarely a real need. It might be information that it would be nice to have at some point down the line, but is it information that you would really desperately need to access? That seems unlikely. So I guess it's about whether the need to keep them is proportionate. First of all, is it likely that you would need it? Secondly, if you did need it, could you find it? And thirdly, if you found a whole stash of clothes labels, could you confidently match up the right label to the right blue skirt? And those are the things I ask myself when I'm tempted to keep a tag. And through that line of questioning, I'm a lot better at getting rid of tags. But the exception I still struggle with is the really kind of almost beautiful ones. They are harder to let go of for me. It helps that most of what I buy doesn't have those kind of tags. I am not a rich person, and I think those kind of tags often come with quite expensive purchases. But I guess maybe that's part of why they feel more special when I do get them. But I feel like it's not an awful compromise to say if I really, really like a tag independently of the clothing it came out of, then I can keep it for now, as long as I get rid of the vast majority of the tags that really don't earn their place in my home. I don't know whether that is any help to you, but thank you so much for getting in touch. I really appreciate it. Do you want to be a de-hoarding darling? You can be now at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. If you love the podcast and want a bit extra, you can finally sign up to be a de-hoarding darling. Members will get an exclusive monthly post with an additional top tip, some podcast and music recommendations, and a personal update from me about how things are going. Find out the full details at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/darling. So my top tip this week is a little clip from the Frugal Friends podcast, which I will link to in the show notes at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk, and they're talking about the benefits of giving things away.
It's one of the beautiful things about sustainability is that, yeah, you can't buy your way to green. It does involve a little relational capital instead of financial.
Yeah. And just thinking about that there, going beyond borrowing, talking about giving away. I live in a community we don't call it a buy nothing group. We call it a curb alert, but there's something so powerful about giving away your perfectly good items that no longer serve a purpose for you and giving them to somebody else who could use the item, extend the life of the item. That is just so anti-consumerist, isn't it? I mean, the corporations do not get a cut when we help each other out, when we're community minded in that regard. I love it.
So just have a think about that. Not everything has to be kept or sold. Sometimes we can just say, I just don't need it. Please have it if you do need it. Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at @thathoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support, and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.
Now on Broadway, An Enemy of the People is a New York Times Critics' Pick. Jeremy Strong is one of the great actors of his generation, hails the Chicago Tribune. In a performance the Wall Street Journal praises as powerfully affecting and bitterly funny. Michael Imperioli sets off sparks, cheers the Hollywood Reporter. Victoria Pedretti is luminous, raves variety. From director Sam Gold and playwright Amy Herzog, An Enemy of the People is urgent, electrifying, and haunting, declares USA Today. An Enemy of the People on Broadway through June 16th only.